Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. It has felt like so long since I have sat down and recorded a proper video, and firstly I just want to say thank you so much for all of your guys' support on the last two videos. I mean, I'm still in shock and I honestly don't think I'd be where I am today. It sounds so cheesy, but just without all of your support, because I think that's really helped to keep me going through this really tough process. And so I just really want to be able to give back to you guys and just say thank you for all of that support. So in this video I'm going to be sharing with you how I prepared for my Declin Psy interview. Now this was my first interview and my only interview, so I don't know whether what I did was correct or whether there's better ways to prepare. I don't have anything to compare it with. Take this advice with a pinch of salt. Also, if you feel like this video is going to stress you out, because I am very aware that the interviews are very soon for some of you, and for some other people it would have passed already, so click off this video if you feel like it's going to be less helpful. But with all that being said, I put it to the people and you guys said you wanted this video despite it being deep into interview season, so let's get into it. Now, I had about 2 weeks to prepare for my interview. I was actually on the reserve list and then I was called to an interview because of the increased funding, I assume. So I only had 2 weeks to prepare. I spent an hour in the morning before work and then 2 hours in the evening after work, and then on the weekends I would spend about like 4 hours, but sometimes less than that and sometimes more than that, depending on what I wanted to do in that week. My interview was for Essex, and Essex is quite a reflective course and the ethos is very different to that of UCL, for example. So just bear that in mind when you are watching this video, that every interview will be different depending on the course that you're applying to and the ethos that they have. So I felt very overwhelmed with the amount of prep that I felt like I had to do for the interview. So I kind of split it up into 3 different parts, and that was general reading about the NHS and other topics, research, and then clinical. So the first bit of reading I did was the NHS Constitution, and this is basically about what the NHS is about, who the NHS are and what they want to achieve. The NHS Constitution goes through everyone's rights and the pledges that the NHS makes in order to achieve those rights. The NHS also has 7 different pledges, and I just think reading through this document really gave me a better idea of like what the NHS is, the values, and it's good to have this understanding because the NHS are the people who are hiring you for the duration and probably after your training. I also read through the NHS long-term plan and the 5-year forward view. Both of these are quite similar in the way that they just outline the plans that the NHS has for the future years. The bits that you need to pay attention to really is a bit about mental health and what they're doing there, and this will just give you an awareness of kind of what clinical psychology might look like in the future and the pressures that clinical psychology faces currently. I also read the paper on reforming the Mental Health Act, which came out fairly recently, and this is just about the changes that are happening at the moment within the Mental Health Act. It's a good current topic to be aware of because it's such a large part of what informs our practice, I feel, and we need to be aware of that as mental health professionals. So give that a read. I also read through the 6 C's, which are the values that underpin compassionate care within the NHS, and thought about those and how I incorporate that into my own practice. The final bit of reading that I did was looking at the 9 key competencies of clinical psychologists, and what I found from this was what my expectations are for training and what training is going to do for my learning. And with all of these bits of reading I spent a lot of time reflecting, so I wrote notes on each of the papers and also just thought about, okay, what do I think about this, how can I critique this, how does this inform my practice, and what does this mean for clinical psychology in the future. And also, with all that being said, these papers are quite hefty, but a lot of the time there are summaries or I would just skim through them, so don't feel like you need to read every single page because I think that would just be ridiculous and overwhelming, but if you can, you do you. So another document that I found really helpful in reading was one created by Trainee Psych Scribbles. I'll link it down below, but it's basically a Declin Psych interview guide, and this document has some example questions but also has a checklist for what you can do to prepare for your interview, which I found really helpful in breaking the whole process down, so I'm very grateful for that document. Research is my weak point and I will happily put my hands up to that. I really struggle with it. So this was really the part that I was concerned about. For my interview, I knew that I was going to be given a piece of research and that they would probably ask me to critique it in some way or another. So in order to prepare for that, I reviewed research design, and so I really relied upon this book by Andy Field, How to Design and Report Experiments. But all I did was read through part 1, and I did read through this book for my stats test, so really it was just like a refresher. This was really helpful in just reminding me like how to design a study, what makes a good study design. I then thought about how I would critique research. So back when I was doing my A-levels, we had this system where it was like APFCC, which was aim, procedure, findings, conclusions and critique. So I kept that in mind because I found that acronym really helpful. But I also used the CASP checklist, which is just a bunch of questions that helps you think about research through a critical lens. I didn't memorize this checklist, although I think it could be a good idea and quite helpful if you could memorize the checklist. It just gave me some good food for thought when going into the interview and reading research, some things to look out for, and overall just gave me more direction on how to approach research from a critical standpoint. And obviously with both of these things, the only way that you're going to get better at critiquing research is by doing it. So yes, these are really good resources, but I think you have to practice it. And that's one thing that I didn't do in preparation for my interview because I honestly didn't have time. But if you do have time, then I would say try to practice critiquing research under time conditions as well. I read through my undergrad dissertation. Now this might be different for you if you've done a master's, but try to read through a piece of research that you've done because they might ask you about it and also critique it. Think about any implications that have come from your study, anything that you think you could have done better. If you were to do the study again, what would you do differently? So kind of think about all of those questions. If you guys watched my previous videos, you'll know that I lost my dissertation for the longest time and I only found it a few days before my interview. So I only had the chance to read through it once and spend a very brief period of time critiquing it, but you know what, it's okay, I had it in the back of my mind. So that's also another thing that I did. Finally, in this research prep section, I read a couple of articles that are relevant to my work. I read one about CBT and cultural adaptations, I think, and then also one on narrative therapy versus CBT and kind of the efficacy of both over time. So those were really helpful articles for me to read personally because of the work that I do in my service. So just find some articles, and really we should be reading articles quite frequently for work, but if you're not, then find an article that is relevant to your job and how that has informed your practice. So you'll notice now, for me, a lot of the preparation was around reading, but I wasn't just sitting there reading the articles kind of aimlessly. I always had in the back of my mind, okay, what does this mean for my own practice? What does this mean for clinical psychology in general? What are the wider implications? And so when we say wider implications, like think about the research in the context of COVID. What does that mean? Think about it in the context of the increase in awareness about diversity issues at the moment. What does it mean for real life people? This part I wasn't as worried about because this is what I do in everyday life at work. I reflected on 2 clinical cases, yes, just 2, because I didn't want to overwhelm myself, and I specifically chose cases that had challenged me in some way because it will allow you to reflect in your interview. If you speak about a case that went really well, there's only so much that you can say that you learnt from that experience, and so for more reflective courses, I think they want to see how you learn and what you've learned from previous experiences. Hence why I chose cases where something went wrong, because then I could be like, yeah, this went wrong, so now I'm doing it this way. And what I will do is kindly share the template that I made for my own clinical case reflections in the link below. So feel free to use that, it's free to download, and I hope you enjoy. Let me know what you think as well if you want me to create more templates, because I actually really enjoy making them. But just like what I've said in previous assistant psychologist interviews, think about why this case was significant for you and what you learn and what you'll do differently in the future based upon this experience. I also brushed up on my formulation skills, and to do this I read through the CBT and narrative chapters of this book. Everyone knows about this book. If you don't, then go out and get it. I think this is so worth the money. I know I'll be using this for years to come. This has loads of different models, so CBT, narrative, systemic, psychodynamic, loads of different models for formulation, and it goes through and tells you how to do it, and also gives you a case study and they formulate it, so you can see how they really formulate in real life. And then I also practice formulating, so I just searched online for clinical vignettes and then I practiced formulating those. And I also thought about previous cases that I've worked on and reformulated, because that was quite helpful for me. So again, just practice formulation. This is the part that I was also very stuck on, and that was familiarizing myself with the theories that underpin the models of formulation. I was really embarrassed to kind of like be googling what theory underpins cognitive behavioral theory, but I think because I was so nervous about being wrong, I had just forgotten about all of my actual knowledge. So with CBT, the theory that underpins that is cognitive theory and behavioral theory, obviously. But if you feel like you need to review it, then review it, because you need to know what theory underpins the formulation that you're using. Again, I think it's just down to like researching online, reading some articles, and going through your undergrad lectures if you still have them. And also following on from that, I went through some basic undergrad theories, so things like social modelling theory and attachment theory, just to have those in mind if I wanted to relate them to my answers. After I did all of this groundwork prep in terms of reading, clinical and research, I then practiced saying some answers out loud. Now, I didn't memorise any answers at all. Let me make that clear. I didn't write any answers down. I just thought about different common questions that are typically asked in interviews. And also, while I'm speaking about this, I've now realised why clinical psychology can seem so hidden and secretive, and that's because we're not really allowed to speak about what goes on in the interviews. We sign an NDA for the selection test, so for those of you who don't know that, that's why people are quite secretive. I don't know, I feel like before I thought it was just people being competitive, but I've realised now that there is actually an authority at play and we're not actually allowed to share that much. So I won't be sharing any specific questions or anything like that. But what I will say is, think about the typical interview questions. How would you answer them? What can you anticipate? In saying that, I didn't prepare any scripted answers for my interview. And I think that really helped my case, because I have all of the knowledge that they're going to ask me about in terms of my own experiences and my understanding of the NHS. I think when you go into the interview, really listen to the question rather than thinking about any answers that you've memorised. I practiced incorporating the information that I had read up on in these answers, so kind of drip feeding all of the different theories that I'd learnt, all of the different parts of the NHS Constitution, reforming the Mental Health Act, just practicing dripping it in slowly where I could. So I don't think the reading that I did dominated any of my answers, but it definitely helped to inform them. Also scheduled in to do some mock interviews and also just to have some informal chats with current trainees. So I'm lucky that I work with 2 amazing trainees at work who offered up some time, and I also went on Twitter and reached out to see if anyone would be willing to help me, and luckily one person did. So I had an informal chat / mock interview with that person, and I also had a more formal, I'd say, mock interview with my supervisor, but then also one that was set up by the minorities BPS group. So if you can, get linked in with the online groups that are available on Twitter, on LinkedIn, but also the online BPS networks, because those are really helpful spaces to be for me. But also just being mindful that there are loads of events that are available around Declan Psy season, and while I found them really helpful, I'm so appreciative of, for example, the Snap BAM group which I attended. I'm so grateful for those spaces being available, but I also think that you have to be aware of your own needs, and sometimes it's more helpful to avoid those groups if you think it's going to stress you out. Oh, and also a massive well done for getting an interview. I can't believe I skipped that part out. Well done you, and keep that in mind. Like, there's a reason for why you've been asked to that interview. There's something that they like about you. Now, I really hope you guys enjoyed this really brief whistle-stop tour through how I prepared for my Declan Psy interview. Please leave a comment with any of your questions down below and I'll try to get back to you. Don't forget you can download that template that I've created in the description below. So yeah, please give this video a like if you liked it and subscribe for more content like this. And until next time guys, I'll see you later. Bye!